I've been furious for a while because everywhere you look, pundits and fans are screaming that Rúben Amorim has to be sacked, that his two-man midfield is killing Manchester United, that the only answer is to shove a third midfielder in there. But think about the hypocrisy here. Just a year ago, these same voices were saying Eric Ten Hag had no identity, no plan, no clear style. Now, United finally have a manager with a defined philosophy, a coach who knows exactly what he wants and how he wants his team to look like. And suddenly, the argument is reduced to two midfielders versus three. It's shallow and it's lazy. And I'm here to set that record straight for most people. As always, welcome to the Shaft Sports Podcast. I'm Andy, and today I'm basically going full rant mode. We're going to rewind the tape, look at how Sir Alex Ferguson built a dynasty with only two central midfielders, then jump forward to Eric Ten Hag, who played with safer numbers in midfield, but was accused of having no identity, and then we'll bring it back to Rúben Amorim. And I would explain the consistent similarity between the problems faced under Ten Hag and the problems faced under Amorim, and why the noise around his two-man midfield misses the bigger picture and what United's real issues are. If you are tired of knee-jerk punditry, you are obviously always at the right place with the Shaft Sports Podcast. Let's start with Alex Ferguson. For most of the 1990s and the 2000s, United lined up in a classic 4-4-2. Two central midfielders with two essentially a right-sided midfielder and a left-sided midfielder who used to bump forward and more play like very aggressive wingers. And yet, these teams dominated English football. Why? Because it wasn't about the numbers on the whiteboard. It was about balance, recruitment, and execution. Ferguson had Roy Keane driving the midfield, Paul Scholes controlling the tempo, Ryan Giggs and David Beckham stretching the width of the pitch, and strikers like Dwight York, Andy Cole, and later Van Nistelrooy and Rooney could clinically finish. The midfield might have been outnumbered on paper, but Ferguson's system made sure that they weren't outmatched. The wingers tracked back, the forwards pressed intelligently, the midfielders covered ridiculous ground, and it wasn't just formation, it was a culture that was built over a long period. It was coaching, it was standards, and that's why even a weaker 4-4-2 midfield with two midfielders, by the way, went toe-to-toe with the best Europe had to offer and came out on top, the treble and all the glorious achievements that Alex Ferguson had in his instances. The question then you have to be asking is, fast forward to Eric Ten Hag, who was the man who was supposed to restore identity at Old Trafford. His Ajax side had played beautiful football, pressing high, controlling games, disciplined structure. At United, he almost exclusively went to a 4-2-3-1, and on paper, that gives you three central midfielders. In fact, it gives you two defensive midfielders, one attacking midfielder, and two wingers with one forward, but the wingers were a lot more conservative. And so that was supposed to dominate the midfield space and create more numbers. On paper, that was supposed to give you stability. So where was the stability? Where was the identity under Eric Ten Hag? Pundits like Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher and Micah Richards were pointing out that Ten Hag's midfield often collapsed. Mount and Bruno, or Kobe and Bruno, or a central midfielder and Bruno Fernandes, who was the attacking midfielder in that system, pushed really, really high, very aggressively to create a counter press that was not effective, leaving Casemiro, who was a defensive midfielder, stranded all alone. United looked stretched and not compact. Opponents ran through the center with nobody guarding the space. And despite technically having three men in the midfield, the whole thing constantly fell apart. Here's the point. The number of midfielders isn't the magic solution. Ten Hag had three midfielders and still failed. Ferguson had two and dominated. The difference wasn't numbers, it was discipline and the player execution in that particular role that we're given. The clarity of the philosophy, the discipline of the players, and the abilities of the players to execute things. And this is the part where I think slightly Amorim has to take some blame. But he's not the problem. The fundamental problem in this United team is player discipline. Look at the game against Brentford. They practically had Manu Ugarte alone in the midfield. Why? Because Bruno Fernandes, who was supposed to be playing as a central midfielder in a double pivot, always panics and just shifts forward instead of being disciplined enough to sit. Center backs move out of position. Wing backs move out of position and are too aggressive and are not counter pressing properly and making it effective. The problem with United's two-man midfield is not that they don't have numbers, it's that the players who are playing are not disciplined enough to execute the role to the demands of the manager. And at this point, Bruno Fernandes is the culprit for this. He's United's biggest problem in that midfield. And I do not get why a manager should overhaul an entire system just to meet the inefficiencies of one player. Because I think that if Bruno Fernandes cannot play there, he should be moved up and a much more disciplined player should be put there. I'm waiting for a day where, Casemiro and Ugarte play that double pivot to see exactly how that execution would go. Now let's talk about Rúben Amorim. He sets his United side up in a 3-4-2-1 or a 5-2-3 if you would want to look at it as a much more conservative formation. That's two central midfielders with wing backs providing width. And yes, opponents have overloaded them. Pep Guardiola threw Rodri, Reinders, and Foden into midfield against United and dominated the numbers. Even Brentford abandoned their two-man midfield for a three-man midfield in possession just to outnumber United's midfield. That criticism is real. But here's what frustrates me. The pundit reaction isn't how can United strengthen that midfield with recruitment or structure that midfield using the players that they have, or criticize the discipline of the players playing that midfield. How they can tweak the partnerships. It's always rip it up, abandon the philosophy, go three-man in midfield. Ten Hag, 10 months ago, had three-man in midfield and he wasn't doing anything. So Amorim was asked after the derby if he would change formation. And his reply was, I'm not going to change. When I want to change my philosophy, I will. If not, you have to change the man. This is a man committed to his footballing principles, but the media spun it as stubbornness, as a refusal to adapt, as proof he's unfit for the job. But the problem is the very same media cooked and criticized the manager who adapted so much in Ten Hag that he lost his identity and lost his way. The media criticized the manager who adapted so much in Ten Hag, played conservative with a three-man midfield, and still said, nope, he did not have any identity. How many times did we not hear the phrase that United's midfield is too open, that Casemiro is left alone? The constant across all these midfield weaknesses is the lack of player discipline to be able to execute the demands of the role. In Ten Hag's midfield, Kobbie Mainoo was a central midfielder alongside Casemiro sometimes, or Ugarte, and Bruno Fernandes was playing in the 10. What used to happen is Kobbie Mainoo would push up into an aggressive midfield position, leaving Fernandes or Ugarte all alone, and obviously leaving Ugarte or Casemiro all alone, and Fernandes was obviously up high as well. What that led to was usually you have the occasional goals that Kobbie Mainoo in that aggressive position would score, like the goal against Wolves or the goal in the FA Cup final against Manchester City. Those are occasional instances where you get the benefit of a midfielder pushing high and not being disciplined. But the truth is, when they do that, it's just on occasion. Majority of the time, the consequence is negative because the midfield gets overrun. To me, the punditry and the commentary on this has been very short-sighted. For over a decade, United have been a club of constant change, managers, systems, recruitment plans, philosophies, and majority of these managers have played a three-man midfield, yet United are still here. Nothing has stuck, and the fans have suffered. Now you finally have a coach with a defined identity, and people want him out after a few tough months. That's the same cycle that got United where they are in the very first place. So yes, a two-man midfield can be risky. Ferguson made it work with Keane and Scholes. Conte made it work with Kante and Matic. Amorim can make it work too, but only if the recruitment as you go along matches the requirements of the philosophy. Only if the club gives him stability and time. When United doesn't need what United doesn't need is another panic sacking because pundits are obsessed with drawing triangles on a chalkboard. What you need is a lot more stability. So if you're fed up with surface level analysis, I want to hear from you. Leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you think is really broken at Manchester United? Is it recruitment, patience, ownership? Let's have a detailed discussion about it. So there it is. The lazy narratives says United's problem begin and end with Amorim's two-man midfield. But history tells us a different story. Ferguson thrived with two. Ten Hag struggled with three. It's not about the numbers, guys. It's about the players. It's about the discipline and the culture of the club. And it's about the positional discipline of the players. I bet you a lot of these players playing this abysmal lack of discipline football would not play for managers like Pep Guardiola, because he's the one, like Thierry Henry would tell you, he's the one who would sub you off even if you went out of position to score a goal. Because systems require discipline to play. And one of the most systemic managers we've seen in recent history have been Pep Guardiola. So if players at United are not being disciplined positionally, you are definitely going to have struggles. Until United fixes recruitment and players become much more disciplined to build stability and actually sticks with a long-term plan, the debate over 2 or 3 midfielders is just noise, to be honest. Just rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. Thanks for listening to my rant. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, rate the show, and share it with fellow fans. As always, drop me your thoughts in the comments and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks everyone, and see you on the next episode.